Grandma has this dress.
No, neither.
I feel like Harry Potter. Too librarian. Too Bono?
No.
No. No. Big no.
Yes.
I look a little bit like a bumblebee. How long you been in these parts?
Blah, if sadness had a color. I bought this? Your Honor, I object.
No. This is so much like my dad.
That is the ticket.
Support for KQED Live comes from Berkeley Rep and the San Francisco Symphony.
Disproportionate impact of
more than half of black business owners
and disproportionate.
Somehow we always find a way to rise.
To the blueprint builders, to the backbones of every block, for the curators of the culture, and for generations to follow. You might fall, but never fail. Keep rising, keep rising, keep rising. Apply for business, marketing, and tech makeovers on us.
Good evening, everybody. I'm Scott Schaefer, Senior Editor for Politics and Government here at KQED.
And I'm Derek Brown, Senior Director of the Leo T. McCarthy Center for the Public Service and the Common Good. Also like to give a huge shout out to the President of the USF, Father Paul Fitzgerald, who was here with us tonight. That being said, this amazing event, which I'm getting ready for, came together with conversations with Scott, which is also on the board of the Leo T. McCarthy Center, Board of Advisors.
And this is really, Derek, what we hope will be just the first of more collaborations between the McCarthy Center and KQED Live. KQED Live, if you don't know, is our live event series. It's dedicated to bringing you journalism live on stage, as well as amplifying our local Bay Area culture and also deepening civic participation. And you can learn more about all of our events by going to kqed.org/live. We also want to thank our season sponsors that make KQED Live possible, including Asian Art Museum, Berkeley Rep, Comcast Business, and the SF Symphony. And we're really grateful to them for their commitment to supporting our mission of civic and cultural engagement here in the Bay Area. And if you're a member, welcome, thank you. And if you're not a member, you can find out more about joining by going to kqed.org/donate.
There we go. And our conversation series is intended to spark ideas about where we want to go as a university, a city, and state to build a society that is sustainable, valuable, inclusive, and equitable. That being said, I would like to say thank you to our Conversation for the Common Good supporters, the Walter and Elise Haas Fund, the San Francisco Human Rights Commission, and thank you so much to all of our promotional partners.
All right, on to our topic for tonight. I don't have to tell any of you that we're living in very turbulent times, and I think everyone appreciates the value of wisdom that comes with age. And with an average age of 65, the 12 members of Congress who represent us here in the Bay Area have plenty of experience and wisdom. But at the same time, it's important to have, what? A little bit of balance. You balance the experience with youthful energy and new ideas.
Absolutely. So tonight, I'm thrilled that we're bringing together 3 elected officials from the Bay Area in state and local government who all represent the next generation of leaders.
And to lead our conversation with them, please welcome someone who's shown that wisdom and youthfulness can go hand in hand, KQED Politics correspondent Guy Marzorati.
And also, we have one of our all-star students, Caitlin Kennedy. She's McCarthy Center scholar and a proud USF Votes team lead.
All right, give it up for them.
All right.
Well, hello everyone, and thank you so much for coming out tonight and spending some time with us here at KQED, and thank you to USF for your partnership and really all your work in engaging young voices and young voters here in our region. Look, millennials and members of Gen Z are shaping California today. We are the 11th youngest state in the country with a median age of 38, but that's not always the case in politics. Just look at the midterms last year when just 22% of eligible voters younger than 30 turned out to cast a ballot in California. Just 22%. And we see that reflected in who ends up in Sacramento and in Washington, where Scott said the median age is definitely not 38 years old.
So tonight we want to hear from 3 elected officials here in the Bay Area who have broken that mold and represent a new generation of leadership in our region. First up is State Assemblymember Alex Lee, who represents cities such as Fremont, Milpitas, and parts of San Jose in the state legislature. In 2020, he became California's first Gen Z legislator.
We also have Alysa Cisneros, who represents District 2 on the Sunnyvale City Council. Cisneros was elected in 2020, and last year she became the first queer woman in Santa Clara County history to become vice mayor.
And finally, we have Hercules Mayor Alexander Walker-Griffin. Mayor Walker-Griffin was selected to be in the top job in his hometown last year at the age of 25.
Please welcome our elected officials. Well, thank you all so much for taking the time to join us tonight. I know Tuesday night is usually city council tonight, so I know you all are, missing some important stuff, but we appreciate you being here. And, as we mentioned, a lot of folks in politics are a lot older than you all. You all got into this elected official game at a fairly young age, so we want to start kind of getting to know how that came about. What was kind of the moment or experiences that sparked your interest in public service? And maybe Mayor Walker-Griffin, we can start with you.
Yeah, thank you, Guy, and then just thank you everybody for having me here. Really, for me, I got into politics around the age of 10. My grandmother, who came from the Jim Crow South, came to California and just always emphasized civic engagement. So that was something that was really important to me. And when I was 17, I was walking along our city's waterfront, and I thought it was super, super dirty. And so I go to our city council meeting, say, hey, I'll clean up for free. Just give me the paperwork, whatever I need. Our old city manager told me no. And that's the point really where I just said, hey, I have to get involved. And so that's what led me to want to increasingly just increase my civic engagement and get involved in different things. So from there, went to the state's community college board, served as my community college student body president, which ultimately landed me where I am today.
And Council Member Cisneros, is there a specific moment that really drove you into politics?
Yeah, absolutely. So I had my daughter when I was 19 years old. And my life was pretty hard, I'll be honest, right? Didn't have a lot of money, was doing a lot of things on my own, hadn't gone to college, didn't know what I was doing. And I read this book called Nickel and Dimed by Barbara Ehrenreich. And reading that book at that point in time in my life made me realize the reasons why my life was so hard isn't because I'm not capable, or isn't it because other people who are living in poverty aren't capable. It's because there are systems that are designed to make it more difficult for some people to get ahead. And that's just the way society is designed. It's not a bug, it's a feature. And so I needed a job at the time, and there was a candidate that was hiring anyone. No experience, just whoever it is, and that candidate was Barack Obama. In 2007. So primary leading into that first election. And I just kind of stuck around. I ended up working on campaigns professionally after that. I was doing some public policy work, consulting on various issues and candidate campaigns. Went to college, did all of that. And so I've been doing this for about 16 years now, and I never thought that I would be the elected. I thought, I have a master's in public policy, staff level, doing that side of it, but it was actually the pandemic that really propelled me into that opportunity and going to districts in my hometown. So,
I mean, that's something that strikes me about all three of you. You didn't just wake up into government. You've been kind of working in civic issues and working in government as you led up to become an elected official. But assembly member, for you, going straight to the Capitol, straight to the state legislature in 2020, what was that moment for you that was both, I'm interested in this, I want to get involved in government, and then what was kind of the push to say, I want to be the candidate?
Yeah, I guess it's funny enough to tie in with the council member's story. I mean, for my district where I grew up in the South Bay, I was kind of the average student that really just wanted to go to class, go home, and hang out with your friends. I didn't really do any clubs. I didn't really do any of those stuff until the last part of being in high school, because it looked better on your college applications than I part of that. And at the time, I remember deciding. You're asking 17-year-olds to decide what are you going to do with the rest of your life on those college apps. And I was deciding between my hobby of doing filmmaking or this thing that started popping into my mind about doing politics. And it was actually the time when I was applying to schools, and this shows you how when I decided, it was the re-election campaign for Barack Obama. So it was around 2012, right? So the re-election time was right then. And I thought, whoa, this seems like a neat thing I could do to help people and probably has more stability than Hollywood. So I'll try to do this one instead. So I applied for political science at UC Davis, never looked back. I was a student senator, then became UC Davis's president during when Donald Trump became president as well. And funny enough, I tell a lot of young people this, is that during those experiences being in student government, I'm sure Alex can relate, is I thought I never want to do government ever again. Because in many ways, it's the same kind of petty disputes and interpersonal politics that exists. But, things just lined up and an opportunity happened, and I ran a long shot campaign and ended up here. But I think it's something remarkable to say that up here, you have people who are very, very young, who are mayors and vice mayors, who are changing the way that California is, and I think it's really remarkable I get to be part of that generation. So.
And Mayor Walker-Griffin, you talk about your community engagement since the age of 10, but is there any specific community organizations or advocacy groups that you've joined or you've marched with?
Yeah, so for me, it really started when I got to Contra Costa College. Started off doing one semester at DVC in Pleasant Hill. But my professor, Dr. Gonzalez, one day she pulled me out of class and she said, hey, you should join ASU. Well, she was originally a professor at Arizona State University, so I thought she was trying to recruit me to go to ASU, and I'm like, why would I leave California? But it turns out it was the student government on campus. So I joined that and became a senator, similar to Assemblymember Lee. Became a senator, vice president, two-term student body president. All the while, I was the president of community organizing and political action. So in the first 6 months of me being the president of that organization, we registered over 500 people to get them to vote for the up-and-coming election. But community colleges are such a gateway to being connected to your local community. One, because you can meet just about anybody there, but also the different connected resources that were there. And for those who are even interested, there's organizations like the UCs have theirs, community colleges have ours, where you can branch out and do statewide stuff. So I eventually got onto the statewide board for the community college student government. And then somehow, some way, at 19 years old, Governor Brown appointed me to the California Community Colleges Board of Governors, and I represented 2.3 million people. So the opportunities are really just limitless. It's just, what do you want to apply yourself for?
So no elementary school class presidents, middle school class presidents here? Oh, okay. Oh.
Kindergarten.
Kindergarten class. What was the platform? You were running more nap time, or?
I wanted longer recess. I remember this.
Okay. I'd run on a platform more nap time now.
Yes, I think that honestly that's a winning message across the board. But I know it's Councilmember Community College for you too was kind of like a jumping off point.
Huge. I don't think I would have gone to college at all if it wasn't for community college. And I had already been working professionally, like running campaigns and doing some very serious consulting by the time I did college. I kind of did life backward, right? The way that most people would. A kid, a career, and then I should go to college. And so I show up at De Anza College and I decided to take some political science classes. And I didn't know this at the time, but it was an incredibly politicized campus with a huge student organizing network and a great department that really fostered that kind of civic engagement aspect. And as a college, they valued civic engagement. I didn't realize I was falling exactly into the place where I needed to be. And so not only did I get this great education, but learning how to community organize across many different demographics at the same time. Because in that college, you're going to meet people from all backgrounds in just an environment where you are different, but you have some really big shared interests. And so it was a huge opportunity for me to work there. I spent time working for the Vasconcellos Institute for Democracy and Action at De Anza College, where I started an internship program that is still going on today. Projects that the interns and I worked on include the AB 540 Student Resource Center, the LGBTQ Resource Center, and the Eco Pass, notably, so free transit passes for all the students. So it was just this really incredible opportunity that really shaped the way, and I'm very lucky. I teach there now, so helping people go through a similar path and showing them you can get involved and actually really matters.
And I know elections can be hard, campaigning can be hard. If we could talk about some of the hurdles that you've all reached. Cisneros, if we could start with you. Do you agree that we have a gerontocracy problem in the government currently?
Well, that's a really interesting way to put that. I have some really wonderful colleagues who are from other generations. But there is a problem when you have a serious lack of an entire portion of the population. And that issue is really related to the ability, number one, to stay in the community where you grew up and to develop roots, because we have a massive housing crisis and an affordability crisis in our region. So not having that stability makes the idea of engaging on that deeper level really difficult for people. Additionally, I mean, young people who are working professionals are disincentivized from joining councils, especially. If you get paid at all, and I have the highest part-time council in Santa Clara County, where we pull in a whopping $30,000 a year.
What?
So and that might be
Sunnyvale.
Good in Sunnyvale, and that's good. So imagine, it's not part-time. You spend a lot more time than that, and you're having to negotiate, the cost-benefit analysis, just balancing your life. So there isn't a lot of opportunities in leadership if you're young. It's designed for people who are either independently wealthy or retired. So that is a problem, because you only get one perspective. If you only have one group of people with one kind of lived experience, representing people who often don't have that. So.
Assemblymember Lee, how do you see that balance in Sacramento? Because this was one of the arguments for term limits in the early 90s, was you had folks that were at the Capitol wielding influence for decades and decades. But the flip side of that is the Capitol lost a lot of experience, and it turned out that lobbyists and people kind of who worked in the Capitol ended up knowing more than the electeds themselves. So how do you view the balance of kind of needing to get new blood in the Capitol with that kind of institutional knowledge?
Yeah, I mean, I firmly been public about I support term limits, and I think now that our new compromise of term limits has worked out, I think it is good. We had the first round of term limits were very punitive. I think they were designed that way because the public was very angry at the way Sacramento was. Sure, you had a lot of experience, but you also had an infamy from the people up there, and they were doing a lot of shady things that I don't think would have survived today. But I think now that the term limits are 12 years total, whether you serve any combo or blend between the Senate and the Assembly, I think that's a good place to be. I frankly think it could be a little bit longer, but I think we're seeing a rebalance now, where the legislators, their staff, and the people we trust in that sense, who we want to empower through democracy, are now the ones who have had that experience and that expertise. And I've come in at a very interesting time, because I came in 2020, obviously during the pandemic, which is very interesting. But in of itself is that the first class of the new term limit legislators are terming out this following election cycle. And there's only 6 of them. They came in 40. So even on average, most politicians turn over. In 6-8 years, they either quit, something happens to them, they're forced to quit, or they get promoted, right? Or they get promoted, they find another job. So it's this kind of natural turnover that exists. Frankly, I've also been joining the calls that Congress should have at least an 18-year term limit too. I'm not convinced that someone can start a career and then by the time they end it, someone becomes from an infant to an adult, that it's not time for you to move on. Yes, there's a lot of experience, but it's also important to refresh the legislature constantly to have those perspectives. And if it weren't for term limits, for better or for worse, depending on who I say this to, you wouldn't have me. You wouldn't have me in the legislature either. But it also gives stability in that sense too. So, for me, I term out in 2032, and I'm already thinking about who should replace me and who we should cultivate to carry on that movement. But that creates a stability versus, for instance, we had dramatically in the U.S. Senate, right? Someone had to die, and then suddenly things change, right? That should not be the way we do things. We don't live in a medieval aristocracy. We live in a democracy in which we should be able to stably plan this. And if someone has 20 years, 12 years, whatever it is, to do the job they're here for, and they're successful at it or they weren't successful at it, I think it's a good enough amount of time to do a job.
And Mayor Walker-Griffin, maybe you can speak on the price that citizens pay for the gerontocracy issue, or the turmoils considering term limits and the issues surrounding that.
Yeah, and so similar to my colleagues, I also got elected and became a council member in 2020. Craziest time to campaign was during the pandemic. But in my city's 123-year history, I'm the first council member, first mayor to have ever grown up in the city. Mm-hmm. And so one of the reasons what made me want to run was I always felt like that perspective was missing. And so when we talk about someone who's been sitting behind the dais for 20 years, usually that person has ran for some other office at some point. Very rarely have you seen somebody be that stagnant and just want that office. But it becomes sort of a relevancy issue. I don't know what I could talk about on my council 16 years down the road, and I'm almost hitting 20 years on it. So, and I also think about too, like the missing perspective. Every city changes about 5 to 10 years. If you walk around Hercules right now, the average family hasn't lived in town for more than 7 years. So it's a completely constant, new, fresh perspective. And I think we want to honor that, right? So when we talk about like the next wave and the next people that we want to see in these sort of elected offices, we're thinking about that new relevant problem, similar to what Assemblymember Lee mentioned. If you've been in office for 50 years, how can you talk about being relevant to the problem? How can you sit there, have an iPhone in your hand, and not know how to use it? If your staff has to guide you on how Facebook works and how Instagram works, I think you might need to check out. We'll give you a nice proclamation or something like that, but it's time to go at that point.
I mean, that was like the joke when they had those hearings in Congress, and one of the senators asked someone, I think maybe it was at Facebook or Meta, how do we, what are you doing about Finsta? How can we outlaw Finsta? And she's like, I don't even have the time to start with that. So, I mean, but what you're saying is basically that the residents, the population of Hercules itself has changed so much that someone who might have been serving there 20, 25 years may not be reflecting even the constituents in the community.
Exactly. And yeah, exactly, to that exact point. And so that's why you want to have that constant fresh change of the guard, because you want that perspective, but at the same time too, allow for those new leaders to implant and set what they want to see course for the city. I know what I want to see for Hercules right now, but in 10 years from now, when the city's more developed than what it is now, let's have a new fresh perspective in there. Let's invite some new ideas. And at the same time too, I'm a big believer in the best perspective is a perspective that you don't have. So the little kids who are playing Roblox and Minecraft right now, and I'm not being able to relate to it when I talk to my little cousins, those are the next leaders that we want to bring in that perspective and actually have them run the city.
Well, let's talk a little bit about campaigning. You all campaigned during the pandemic. For some of you, the first campaigns you were running was during COVID. And Mayor, we actually have a photo of you here, I think, going out and doing the work of sign holding out during COVID. I mean, kind of take us through that experience. And as someone who, I know you had worked for other elected officials in the past, was there something that you maybe brought to the campaign where it was like, I've seen someone do it this way, I know I need to carry this forward, or I know I don't want to do this as a candidate or as an elected official?
Well, first thing I would have done is if I knew somebody was taking a picture of me, I would have put lotion on my elbows, because that's embarrassing. But one thing that I told myself that I wouldn't do was be the elected official that disappears after election time. So people would always tell me, why do you give out your number to people when you're campaigning? Well, I'm like, well, I told them I wanted to be accessible. I told them I wanted to represent them. So why not be accessible, right? Why not be that open door? But
it's not a burner. You're giving them the real...
My mom gives out my number more than I do, so just letting you know. But another thing that I definitely did learn was just that connectedness of meeting people where they were. It was so weird knocking on doors and not talking to people physically. I was talking through Ring. So for like the first year after like winning my election, I would be at Lucky, Safeway, and somebody would come up to me like, hey, we talked through my doorbell. And I'm like, yeah, House, you, yeah, good to see you. But another thing that I say that I would not do, that I would have done differently, was I wouldn't have put so much of an emphasis on yard signs. We had a huge digital presence, but this is where the generational conflict was happening. You don't have your yard signs out. You don't have your yard signs out. Well, I just spent $3,000 on digital ads. I'm going to be running 24/7 for the next couple of weeks. No, that's not going to win. No, that's not going to win. So I think I would have worked with more people who were a little bit more relevant to how technology works with things in the politest way possible.
And Assemblymember, do you have anything to add?
Running during the pandemic was certainly an interesting challenge. So I had obviously the primary and the general. I won, that's from the first race. I won the primary on March 3rd, 2020. My county, Santa Clara County, was the first county to shut down on March 17th. So a story I recount often is on March 11th, I went up to Sacramento. I met with the speaker, Anthony Rendon at the time. And he congratulated me. He said, you did really good. It's very impressive. No one knew who you were and how this happened. And I remember saying to him, this is really nice of you and to have this nice meeting in the speaker's office and everything, but I'm going to lose. The data is going to change and I'm going to fall out of the top 2. But it didn't. And then obviously the world changed really rapidly. I did not declare victory until April 24th, which was when the results were actually certified. No one in our team could really believe it. But frankly, if California did not say, we want to speak first on the presidential election, and we had a June primary, I don't know if I would have won. Because most of our campaign was in door knocking and talking to people face to face. Yes, it got to the point where I'm talking to people through Ring and social media, but that was the heart of our campaign. So I don't know if I would have won without that. Yeah.
And you had the Bernie effect, right? The presidential primary was going on. You were running as a progressive, and it's interesting. You were running as
I
a
got endorsed by
progressive,
Bernie too,
and you were endorsed by Bernie, exactly. So, but you were running in South Bay, parts of San Jose, Milpitas, Fremont, that I think people might not associate with being the most progressive parts of the Bay Area. So how did you make your message connect with residents, or is that outdated? Did you find that people were, that is a place that kind of message could be embraced?
Yeah, I think progressive is all about being rooted in people. So if our message is about being additive to people and making sure that everyday families have access to healthcare, housing, political rights, civil rights, then it actually engages a lot of people. One fact that I've always been astounded by and why I didn't think I was supposed to win was that general wisdom is that the early vote is the more conservative, older vote. I won on the first ballot. I kept winning as it going on. And then the late vote, if you will, which are generally supposed to be younger, more progressive people, boosted me up even higher. But I did really well with the early vote. And from what I've now being in office 3 years is that I think a lot of our message of what we talk about resonates with people of all ages and sometimes political partisanship that they think they have. Because what I talk about is getting corporate money out of politics. So we should not have an elite system in our democracy. How we should have housing for everyone, and how we shouldn't means test to death everything that the government comes and helps you with. And even though that's a broad-reaching kind of progressive idea, I find a lot of older folks, even in my community, say, actually, you might have a point. Or I argue with Republicans at the door and be like, well, maybe you're right about this. And especially what we know in my district is that, and I'm one of 2 legislators that doesn't take any corporate money whatsoever in the legislature. It's immensely popular in our district, and people want that source of integrity, even though, of course, in our hyper-political world, that's super far left or whatever it is. I think normal people every day want those things, and that's what my district connects with.
And to add on to that a little bit, something that we all have in common, right? We were elected in 2020. That's a presidential election year, where I think you see a lot of the difference, and you get a skewed older, skewed conservative voter base is the off-year elections. And when I think about that, I feel so fortunate to be in that presidential election year because you do have more people just turning out. It's really hard to turn people out and keep people engaged through those those smaller campaigns. Because I like to say, Joe Biden, he did a lot for my campaign. He really turned out the vote for me. Hey, Joe Biden, going ahead and reminding people, fill out your ballots, make sure you're doing that. And that's a huge help to more progressive candidates. You have people who are turning out for that. So
I'm very jealous that you have every 4 years. I'm every 2 years constantly. So.
I am happy about that too. I don't envy you that, but I think about that and how to support progressive candidates who are running in those tougher year elections. Because in my city, it's rotate 3 seats go on presidential election year, and then in another 2 years, the other 3 seats. And you see a difference in who gets elected.
Absolutely.
And council member, to follow up, we have a photo here of you on your campaign trail in 2020. What was it like campaigning for the first time during the height of the pandemic?
Like I said, I had worked on many a campaign, and the first thing I had to do was forget a lot of everything that I'd learned because it no longer applied. And getting out of that mindset that, oh, this is how it should be, and this is how you're going to be successful. It's like, no, you've really got to figure out how to engage with voters in a way that I didn't knock any doors, actually, 0. It was not something that my community was appreciative of when other candidates did it. So I kind of listened to that and went full digital. And something that I did during the campaign was I had a team of phone makers. I had my volunteers make COVID check-in calls through the list, just saying, I'm here with Alysa Cisneros' campaign, but we're not here to talk about her. Do you have the resources that you need? Because a lot of times when you're speaking to voters, you're talking to them because you want to know what they're concerned about and what they care about. And during the pandemic in 2020, we knew what people were concerned about in that moment, right? I was just running in the general and really tuning into that and being responsive in a different way. It was a lot of digital, phone banking, and text banking, huge, as well as I have there in that image my door hangers. We did hang doors. We didn't do the conversations. And then lawn signs, but lawn signs don't vote. So there's limited useful.
That's the mask.
Yeah, and we had I had some volunteers at the local Makers Center go ahead and print up some of those cool Alysa campaign branded masks.
That's great. I mean, that kind of engagement that you're talking about, I can imagine it being harder with younger voters. I mean, just naturally at that kind of phase of life, you're moving around. You might be a voter in Sunnyvale one election and then moving to Santa Clara the next. What are ways that you all kind of reached out or maybe specifically thought, okay, here's how I'm going to try to catch or target younger voters, and making sure that they're registered, that they know where to vote, and that, you know, in your cases, that they vote for you?
Yeah, I can start that off. Meet people where they are. So for me, it was kind of like, okay, growing up in my area, I know exactly where young people are. I know exactly what they're thinking because I'm a part of it, right? I was 23 when I got elected. So meeting them there, and then oftentimes talking about like, hey, I know you grew up here, so what would you like to see in your city? And then just straight up ask them, because a lot of times candidates, especially incumbents, will come up to you and be like, I've done this for your area, vote for me, bye. But it wasn't like, hey, you know, you lived here 15 years, what would you like to see in your city? So oftentimes what I would do, I would have forums on my campaign page, and I would post them to like the big community groups, whether it be Nextdoor or Facebook, and just directly reach out to people and ask them. And at the same time, the power of memes was a great way to spark conversation, because you had this meme, but then I also have something going on with the city. Drop your comment below, and let's talk about it.
Yeah, I'm going to echo that. Meet people where they're at, and where they're at is I really focused too around the transit stops, because there were some people still going to work, and a lot of them were younger. There's a Caltrain station right in my district there, and also online, right? Like, it's important to have a presence on social media that's not just next door, but actually be active on, you know, Twitter was a huge part of my campaign, and so was Instagram. And you were able to kind of, you know, with advertising, figure out people in your local area. But there's also a huge population of people in my community with WeChat, and my campaign really went and reached out to that especially East Asian community there, because a lot of young people use it. You just need to figure out where they are and talk to them about issues that they care about and ask them about their lives, because a big reason, I did a lot of research on this in grad school, but a big reason why a lot of young people don't get involved in politics there is that, oh, I'm not part of this community because I got priced out, but also because they don't think it will matter. Like, their representatives don't understand them, and they quite frankly don't care about them, and they don't hear anything about things that are going to affect their lives. And when you talk to those younger voters about, yeah, I share that experience with you, and I want to hear about that, and let's think, what do you think would make this look better? It works there. And I think you should start at high school, honestly, talking to high school students in your city, because those are your future voters. And also they talk to their parents. And also you want to build a lifetime habit of civic engagement from the start, and not let people fall off and then have to get back on.
Assemblymember Lee, as the first Gen Z state legislator, have you experienced any discomfort from your fellow colleagues about your age, and have you ever experienced feelings of imposter syndrome?
All the time. All the time. I don't really understand this notion, but oftentimes my colleagues like to remind us that I am younger than them, even though I don't bring it up. So they'll often be like, you hear this, right? Yeah. They're like, oh, this thing happened in 1985 or something. Oh, you weren't born yet then. I was like, yeah. I mean, we know. I mean, I'm not going to bring how old you are then, but it's like, but it seems to be very often that they like to bring those things up, and then they'll be surprised when I understand some sort of like 70s reference or something, and I'm like, I know what the internet is. I can search things, and pop culture existed too. So it happens a lot. I will say, I think oftentimes that what we still struggle with, even from other Democrats, is that I get talked down to a lot. Mm-hmm. Often I think, giving the benefit of the doubt, I think it is that they see their children in me. So it's like when we have a disagreement, they try to bring down that tone, which I've not seen them do to other colleagues, to be frank, even if I have disagreement. And I've had to have a stern talking to sometimes, like, you can't talk to me like that, like I'm your son or something. I'm your colleague. So it's happened, unfortunately. And, it's unfortunately in our space, we have to reassert ourselves that we are equals. I'm not better than you. I'm not worse than you. We're equals. So it happens a lot, and with imposter syndrome, it's all the time. I actually don't think I have imposter syndrome anymore because I've just accepted that I'm winging everything I'm doing, that I don't exactly know if this is right, but I feel like it's right, so I'm just going to do it. And that's what got me to win elections. So I said I'm just going to embrace that,
Councilmember Mayor, I saw you both nodding through that.
Yeah, something I hear a lot and have since I decided to run, and it really didn't happen so much in my career in public policy. You look too young to be a council member. I'm 35 years old. I don't feel particularly young. Or you don't look like a council member. Or last year, you don't look like a vice mayor. And it begs the question, what do they look like? Does it look like an older white guy? Because believe me, my city went to districts because we were under threat of lawsuit because nearly every council member and mayor in our history was an older white guy, despite being one of the most diverse cities in California. So that experience of just not even being seen as a leader because you don't look like everybody else they've seen in that leadership position. And I guess, I have some really great colleagues, and there is implicit bias there that I think that everyone, coming to the talking down to, it's like, no, I wasn't on planning commission for 8 years. I was doing other things like my career and, not even necessarily living in Sunnyvale, but that doesn't mean I don't know what I'm doing. You might forget I have 16 years of experience doing this, right? So age doesn't necessarily come with that experience. You can be relatively young, unfortunately, relatively young, and still come in more experience than most council members do. So I do have to reassert that. And the imposter syndrome was really hard because, like I said, I'd been treated with a lot of respect in my former roles. So at the beginning of being elected, that was so hard. But when you realize you have a community around you, you get the people together to hype you up and say, no, that's, swear word, insert there. You should remember exactly how much you know, right? And the longer you do it, the easier it gets, I think. You develop a thick skin.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I totally agree with both of my colleagues up here. I mean, for me, I think where I really was able to, I still experience it, but nip the sort of imposter syndrome in the butt was when I was 20 and we were starting Calbright College and got to talk to Governor Brown. He came to our board meeting, he's sitting right across from me, and I had to tell him everything that was wrong with it. So one of the things was telling him that, hey, Governor, we don't have the broadband to support this infrastructure throughout the state. This is in 2018 before the pandemic and this conversation even started with broadband. And then so I get ripped apart by some people through my email while the meeting was still going on. So it was really crazy experiencing that. But then after that, me and Governor Brown are sitting directly in front of each other having lunch. And I'm like, so Governor, what are you going to do next now that you're terming out? He says, kid, I'm making olive oil, with his fork pointed at me. And then so at that moment, I was like, okay, all imposter syndrome's lost. But I really had to remember that because when you're sitting right there, that kind of moment's happening. I had to remember to myself that I'm here, and now as the mayor, you're coming to me for something, right? More often than not, people will see the age before they see the resume. So for example, in 2018, I'm a guardsman, for most people who don't know this. In 2018, I was at the campfire in Paradise. So when people were hearing about the casualties that were happening, that was me and my friends keeping the tally on that and running those numbers. So people will oftentimes never see that at 20 years old, I voted to make community college tuition free and have been doing all this stuff before I was even old enough to drink. They just see how old you are. Had a meeting with some folks not too long ago. I have this jacket that says Alex Walker-Griffin, mayor. Come up, sit down at the table, and they said, oh, so you work for the mayor? And I said, well, he'll be here any minute now. So it happens a lot, but you know what? You have to laugh about it, right? And then so if people follow me on social media, you'll see my mid-morning rants after the gym. And so sometimes I'll talk about that kind of stuff. But at the end of the day, you got to laugh at it.
And Mayor, maybe you can speak on some of the sacrifices of the jobs. I know, I'm sure there's moments where you have to skip some social events and miss out seeing your friends and family.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, getting elected at 23, now I'm 26, most of my friends are still going to the club. So it's not like I'm going to be joining them.
You're like, there's this really important CEQA appeal that I have to...
Right, exactly. So I have to be like, hey guys, I can't join you tonight because I don't want, you guys can take your pictures with your bottle of Hennessy or whatever. I can't partake in that. But even sort of the little things, right? Like, you just have to be kind of cognizant of how things will potentially project to the public, but also too, I have a full-time job. And so it happens every single week. You'll either have a meeting or you'll have an event that you have to skip out on simply because of the requirements for it. Whether I'm talking to my city manager or I'm talking to someone who wants to do something in town, it always collides. But I think the big benefit for me is I'm a bachelor, so I don't have to think about how's this going to impact my children, or I have to think about my spouse or something like that. So that's probably the one benefit that's been in my favor.
And Councilmember, did the kind of juggling work and family change at all as an elected official versus kind of your past roles, your past work? Did it get more difficult?
Yeah, of course it does. It does get harder because before, even though the long hours, right? My kid, bless her, she is used to that kind of that's. I have a lot of evening engagements. That's kind of been the thing, but it's different when you're also so public facing. And having your life, in a lot of ways, your life is an open book. And so the kind of anonymity you could have as a staffer or as just somebody who works in a research firm or in a public policy shop is different. So you have to think about how your actions are going to go ahead and perhaps reflect on your family. Is this going to do it? Because one of the sacrifices you make is really to your safety, especially women in politics right now, right? I've had stalkers. I've had to move into a more secure building because of threats to my safety over things like votes or just being in the public eyes. So the kind of sacrifices that my family have to make for me is balancing that. We're actually physically unsafer to the point where we're packing stuff, right? And in terms of balancing it, my kid's a little bit older, so less of that demands. But when I talk to people with younger kids especially, there's a lot that you miss there. And because especially around election time, you have a lot of weekend stuff too. Mm-hmm. So you have to be able to find that time to spend quality time throughout the week as best you can, or else it's really easy to lose touch with people.
And Assembly Lee, is there any specific sacrifices that you can point to?
I think it's already great illustrations for my colleagues here, but being in the state legislature, I at least have the privilege of the resources and the staff to support the full-time duties I have to do, but this is a 24/7 job. Just like the mayor said, I can't partake with a lot of things with my friends who are a similar age who are still trying to figure out what they're doing with their lives or if they're just going to hang out. And Tuesday night, some of them might actually be out in the club right now still. But the thing is, you make a lot of sacrifices in that way, and it comes with a big toll, but I am privileged and lucky to have a really amazing staff that support me. And I sometimes joke that, my staff, I'm really busy in the Capitol, then they relay race me down to the district, and then I'm busy down there. So I'm just working 7 days a week, but, it's very much the same case for you. You're basically working 7 days a week too, and you're also judged through the kind of fishbowl. So I have to also be very careful about how I say things and how I present. So it's challenging, but at least in the state legislature, we give the resources to be full-time.
Yeah. One thing that stands out to me about all three of you is you represent more suburban parts of the Bay Area that I think historically have kind of been whiter suburbs, but are now really some of the most diverse communities in our region. So I'm wondering, you're taking office, how you're thinking of balancing kind of the perspectives, the demands, the different views of voters in neighborhoods where, a lot of different languages being spoken, a lot of different cultures, and kind of dealing with that as an elected official on the ground. And maybe I'll start with you, Mayor.
Yeah, so Hercules is one of the most diverse cities in the state. I mean, we're 55% Asian alone, 45% Filipino. Just growing up in the cul-de-sac that I lived in, where my mom still lives now, you can meet just about anybody. So it's one of those things where you have to actually talk to people in order to know what their perspective is. But there are some similar tones, right? So there's definitely the tone of the first generation American. You have the immigrant perspective, right? And you'll start seeing why people moved to Hercules to begin with, because they wanted that nice suburban home. And that's where I think that dialogue happens, where you as the elected has to come in. And I've been trying to do this a lot, where we have these community spaces. We have our State of the City address, or even I just go on Instagram and just, hey, tell me what's up, or hey, I'm going to be here, come and talk to me. And then even showing up to some of the community events that are ethnic-centric, right? Whether it's the Hercules Chinese Association or it's the Filipino Cultural Night. meeting people where they are, so that way, one, you can hear them directly, but then also, two, let them be as free as they possibly can. Because a lot of times people will meet with you and then they'll feel really scripted, but if you meet them in their element, and I guess you could say their territory, then that's probably when you'll learn the most about it.
Yeah, and I kind of want to see, like, it's interesting to say diversity because that is true. And Sunnyvale too, we're actually a majority foreign-born population, so majority immigrants, and it's wonderful, and it's so great. But then you think we have that diversity, but we don't have a lot of economic diversity, and it depends on what group you're talking about, like the non-white group, right? Whereas you have a lot more South Asian, East Asian folks coming in, and a majority of our immigrant population comes from those groups. You also have, especially in Sunnyvale, the Black and Latino population, which is being pushed out in a significant way. And you don't see a lot of that economic diversity. As things get more expensive, you have more diverse folks, but they tend to come from a more homogenous background even than that, not necessarily. But when I think about diversity in my city, I think about, can people who wash dishes or wait tables in downtown Sunnyvale live here? Because they're both ethnically diverse and economically diverse. So I think about that. But in terms of getting folks and wonderful neighbors who do come from many places abroad involved is really to think about ways that we are making government more accessible. For example, we're now venturing into translation services for our city meetings. We have it happening for one meeting in Spanish, but we're piloting that, so we're going to be able to broadcast what we're doing to folks who may not. We know English is not everyone's first language or even the most comfortable language that they work in. And as government officials, it's on us to go ahead and communicate what's going on. And if we want their participation, then we need to meet them where they're at culturally and just the sheer language barrier, right? And there are community spaces that you should go to. Libraries are a really good place to reach out to people because, as it turns out, libraries are universally beloved and utilized.
I mean, is that, Assemblymember, is that how you're kind of thinking about, broadening language access? Is that a piece of how you try to at least get in touch with more constituents or kind of keep those lines open to Sacramento?
Yeah, absolutely. I represent a district that is 60% Asian American, 60% Asian American, and it is actually the largest Asian American district and congressional district in the entire country, besides Hawaii. But there's something that was on full display. Language access is the fundamental entry point for constituent services. This was on full display and to my frustration during the pandemic, where much of the outreach and the programming and services was English and tech oriented. So people who were not tech savvy nor English savvy were the ones most not predisposed to getting this information. And what did we see with vaccination rates and testing is that those communities were left behind. And that was something, unfortunately, the legislature kept pushing the administration on very often, but that was something that I saw in full display. Something kind of strange about my district, because it is for a long time been an Asian American majority district, but it's grown more, is that until I started doing it, no one campaigned with it. In San Francisco, you do this a lot, but no one campaigned with a Chinese name. So my name would be Alex Lee and Lee Timming, my Chinese name too. And then in the successive races, people started doing that to copy me. And I would also do language, different language translation in my mail or whatever I have. I would actually have them all, not like a Spanish mailer or a Chinese mailer, but they're one universal mailer. So it would be like, universal housing for everyone, right? And it'd be the same thing, but in 4 different languages. And I very intentionally did that because if we're going to meet people where they're at, we also have to be able to communicate. And I was very fortunate that I have a lot of campaign staff that can speak different languages, because there's a lot of people who could speak a lot of languages that I had no idea how to speak or listen to at all. But it's important to have at least language access.
And council member, I know we talked about your campaigning during the pandemic. Civic participation changed tremendously during the pandemic. Is there any risk of going back to the old ways, like knocking on doors, having the yard signs, stuff like that?
Well, I'm running again in 2024 and engaging civically. And as far as I know, at least now, right? But with the world as it's been, I don't make any guesses for what tomorrow is going to be like or what's going to be required of me during this campaign, because we live in unprecedented times every single day. I think we were talking about that earlier. And I am looking forward to getting back to that door-to-door, right? But we do have more tools in our toolkit. There are silver linings to the pandemic. I look forward to continuing having a robust digital presence, right? Especially because young voters are still reached best that way. But there are so many opportunities when you talk to someone face to face, it's a little bit irreplaceable. Because instead of hearing from me on the phone or over text or one of my volunteers, being able to talk to me and know who I am builds a really important trust, especially if you have like a district like mine where you have only about 12,000 voters. You can actually go and talk to everyone if you like really get a good pair of sneakers. So I'm looking forward to that a lot, but we can take a lot of lessons about what it means to reach people who we weren't able to reach before because of those challenges with COVID. And we all learned, both as candidates and as governments, how to do that. And we'd be remiss not to continue doing it.
Right. I mean, city council meetings, the state legislature, suddenly it was all available on Zoom, and you could listen to hours and hours of public comment from the comfort of your living room. So is that, that kind of access, is there a concern that maybe that goes away? Is that something, at least in Hercules, that you want to make a part of council engagement going forward?
Well, actually, it's unfortunate we had to do this. We actually had to, and so many other cities in the area, and actually throughout the country, had to do this. We had to cut public comment on Zoom because there's been a wide array of people throughout the country calling in and saying some of the most hateful things that you could ever say. So it is unfortunate that is the case, but that does not mean the accessibility has gone away. So one way that we've definitely stepped up our game in terms of being able to reach with constituents, either from the city council perspective or through the city perspective, is we have an app online. In addition to every other, we have an app that you can download to your phone. So rather than you calling 510-245, blah, 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 you just take a picture of whatever problem it is, say on the street or whatever, and it goes directly to our public works team. But I do think that it is a little scary to think that we have some bad actors who are ruining a good thing, and we don't know when it's necessarily going to stop. But up until literally our last meeting 2 weeks ago, all of our meetings have been on Zoom, and it's been great to have people who traditionally would have never come in, especially some of the senior populations that can't make it out at Tuesday at 7 p.m. or working families. Have them participate online has been great.
Yeah, we decided as a council to do permanent hybrid meetings. So we meet in City Hall, but we also have that Zoom component. And we have not shut down public comment, remote public comment yet. And we really hope we don't have to, because that is such a huge way we get participation. In fact, we often get more people participating in public comment on Zoom than we do in person, actually. That's most common. And so when we would just hate to have to go ahead and shut that down, because it really is taking that, when people participate in real time, they can send emails, they can contact, but there's something about speaking in front of your representatives in that meeting, because they're also responding to the discussion and the questions we had before we opened the public comment period. And there is such value to that direct interaction. Something I do with my students is I require them, you have to give public comment at one public meeting. I don't care what it's on, but you have to give a coherent comment, because this is what people don't realize. It's like you can go ahead and email your congressman, and hopefully you'll get something back from a staff member, but your city council members, and your assembly member with your district staff, we're here, and you can talk to us. And engaging in that democratic process is so important. So even though that Zoom bombing is happening, I'm like, I want to stick it out and see what we can do to curb it. And I'm more stubborn than they are. That's how I think.
So in the legislature, we've unfortunately mostly gotten away with Zoom comments now. It's to the discretion of committee chairs now. So I think in the Assembly, I am one of 2 committees that still take Zoom public comment. And yes, it is riddled with people who have very terrible things to say. But I still believe in reducing the barriers of public participation. In my first year in office, I thought I was going to author a slam dunk easy bill. I said, wow, we learned during the pandemic that Zoom comment and Zoom hybrid meetings work so well. Let's just keep this forever. That was one of the hardest bills I ever worked on. I got it to the governor's desk, and it would only have been for large cities and large jurisdictions, and it got vetoed. And then I tried a different method.
What was the opposition?
To their first bill? I remember. Oh, it's the city. The first time the cities opposed it because they said it would cost too much, it's impossible to do, and then suddenly everyone was doing. I mean, everyone was basically doing it. So I said, I don't understand how you
called us.
doing exactly. Yeah. I mean, everyone was doing it, but the cities still said that it was too cost prohibitive. You couldn't do it, et cetera, et cetera. And then I made this big compromise where, okay, why don't you just do it for the big cities, right? Theoretically speaking, even though the technology scales the same, no matter if you're LA or if you're Sunnyvale, why don't we just try to do it? And that was a big argument at the time. This is 2021 at the time, too. So, yeah, unfortunately, that got vetoed and still hasn't been the same since. But I still think it's important for city councils, if you are able to do it, to do the hybrid method because it really does reduce a lot of those barriers. And especially in Sacramento, where you'd really legitimately have to take an entire day to come up to do your 30 seconds, it means a lot to people. So that's why I keep it in my own committee.
And Assemblymember, what do you believe is a low barrier way for young people to get involved in local government? I know you just spoke on about how far the Capitol is from the Bay Area.
During 2020, during the protest in remembrance of George Floyd's murder and Black Lives Matter, my friend, for the first time I went to high school with him, he texted me, he said, I hope you're proud of me. I sent my very first ever angry email to the city council and the mayor. And it is really important that, like as important as it is to make public comment, which I think is very important because normal people really only ever interact with politicians two ways, when they vote for them or they make a public comment. That's only two ways they have a direct relationship with them. But it is also important for people to get involved in that sense. I think something that I saw a lot and still to this day is those easy, almost like QR code ways to repopulate emails or to make calls. It lowers that burden for a lot of young people to be like, oh, I gotta go look it up and see who my person is. But if you streamline it and just say, all right, here you are, you're on the phone, make your comment now, I think it's really important to do stuff like that.
So we want to pivot and talk about an issue that you all three are working on both at the state and local level, and that's housing. The state legislature, Assemblymember Lee, you are, I think, one of 5 renters. Is that right? And we have a chart here that shows just the disparity that exists. 120 state legislators, 5 renters. I think you all have formed a renters caucus and can easily fit within one photo together for your group photo. But just, what does that do for government and how housing policy and renting policy comes up in the course of the legislature when you have so few people that are actually renting?
That's right. So there's only 5 legislators in the entire legislature out of 120 that are renters, meaning we do not own any other property. There's all 5 of us. There you are. All 5 of us that we do not own any other property and that we live in rent. We're renters, right? And this is quite jarring because nearly half of the state are renters. And if we were relying on the lived experiences of folks, this is none of their fault. But if you are a renter in 1970 or a renter in 1980, your experience as being a renter today, even if you're trying to become a homeowner, is vastly different. And so the push for stronger renter protections or the push to make homeownership at least physically attainable is much more urgent within our caucus, and that lived experience is important. That's part of the refreshing and hopefully having more voices at the table. Because if you're someone who's very secure in your housing situation and you can afford to buy multiple homes, this is a very different economic situation, lived experience than myself. And frankly speaking, the real estate lobby has immense power in Sacramento and a lot of resources, and tenant organizations don't. So I think having even our small but mighty caucus has proven to be pretty successful. We passed this year, Assemblymember Haney of San Francisco, he passed a bill, we all worked on, of course, to limit security deposits. And that before was not going to happen, right? I mean, you could charge unlimited security deposit if you wanted to. And we passed also other renter protections that other colleagues made. So I think where the results are showing, the material world is putting pressure on people, but it is a huge, stark contrast.
Quickly, I just want to say, I think we're going to try to save a couple minutes at the end for questions. So if anyone does have a question, you can look out for a microphone, and we'll try to save a couple minutes for that.
And Councilmember Mayor, younger voters have helped drive the YIMBY movement in the Bay Area. How is this push for more housing landing in your suburban communities?
So I'll say something really cool. Sunnyvale has an organization called Livable Sunnyvale. Livable California, a NIMBY organization, took their name from Livable Sunnyvale. That's my understanding, but they've been around for longer than the YIMBY movement as we know it or can characterize it today has been around. And it is a much older population of that membership, of people who actually, you get a lot of homeowners and more of the folks that you would expect to be on the other side. But they had been holding and like pushing the YIMBY line, like I said, before YIMBYs. So we had, when YIMBY started to come in, there's already an intergenerational partnership there. And I think my city is more accepting than most of the idea of, the only thing we can do is go up and build more in order to make this affordable. And when you phrase it in ways like, hey, I am one of 3 people that I know of that I graduated from high school in Sunnyvale who still live there today. It is not by accident. Do you want your grandkids to live near you? Or do you want to drive to Tracy? And so we can go ahead and build here, and also more condos to age in place instead of having to move out of the area when you need to downsize. So there's a lot of areas where we can go ahead and find that common ground. And in Sunnyvale, we've been able to do that often with the leadership of organizations like Livable Sunnyvale, who paved the way for us to have these open conversations and build that culture of more inclusivity. Of course, there's always tough stuff and resistance there, but we stay pretty civil about it. And that's, I just have to thank the folks in that organization who've been doing this work a long time.
Mayor, that kind of intergenerational coalition for more housing that the council member is talking about, is that something that's going on in Hercules? I mean, how are you approaching the housing issue in your city?
Yeah, basically the exact same way, where we have to have everybody at the table and then really make it so people can imagine what that means for them and their quality of life. I'm pretty sure most of us, if we're from the area in the crowd, no, most people can't return back to the city that they grew up in. And so really the message that some of my colleagues have been trying to present to people when they're a little bit more apprehensive about developing housing is, listen, we're trying to make sure that the people who grew up in Hercules can stay in Hercules, and people who may want to move into the city for whatever reason can actually be able to do so. So you get a lot of the NIMBY comments, oh, we don't want people from Richmond, Vallejo coming into our city. And first off, wait a minute, that's kind of pretty jacked up to say. But on top of that too, it's like you're leaving out your grandson, your granddaughter, whoever, or maybe even your next door neighbor that went off to college and now wants to come back to the city that they grew up in, but they can't afford to. And so when we talk about housing in Hercules, we try to talk about all income levels and all types, because sometimes, especially at the city level, we can kind of get painted into this corner of just perpetual rentership. But at least in my city, having such a strong majority minority city, we want to make sure that people can actually own homes and pass that wealth on to the next generation.
Now, all 3 of you now have a seat at the table where decisions are made. Tell us about a time you've brought generational perspective to an issue that would have been missing without you in the room.
I'll just say we talk about at the state level things and plans in the billions of dollars and things like 2050, 2040, or end of the century. The reality is it's going to be people like us and our children that will live through all these things. So I think about everything in long-term planning. And when it comes to housing crisis and of course the climate crisis as well, we need to be investing and think about what can we do today that will last 100 years from now. And that's why I'm a big proponent of social housing, because all of our developed democracies and countries and our peers have taken upon themselves of public sector construction for housing. They have put their own strategy and implementation for solving housing crisis, but we never learned these things. These are countries that had it 100 years ago. They figured it out, and it's still successful today. So we have to redouble down on these things and think about, all right, we can't just kick the can down the road. How are we going to lay the foundations for success for people we will never maybe know? And I think about it all the time, because I think as we say, oh, we're going to do this thing in 2047 and do these things, I'm still going to be very much alive, hopefully, and I still will hopefully not be then be like, why did we do it that way, 20 years ago? So I think about it in that sense.
Councilmember, do you have a time like that where you're thinking, you know what, if I didn't bring this issue up as someone from my generation, like no one would be talking about this in this meeting or in this hearing?
Yeah, I can think of it. So unfortunately, I'm missing some of this conversation actually in the council meeting that is happening in Sunnyvale right now without me. But my colleague, who is now Vice Mayor Dean, and I worked on getting UBI conversation on the table, Universal Basic Income. And we're having a study session on that tonight, so staff is returning with information. But things like, that conversation would have happened if my colleague, Vice Mayor Dean, and I hadn't really come in and said, like, hey, we've struggled to live here, and let's talk about what it's like for people in Sunnyvale who are living right on the edge there. And other issues that have come because I was there, a lot of our work currently on to support the unhoused population and to address homelessness in a compassionate but also very impactful and important way have come from a lot of the study issues I've done in terms of building capacity as a city to address issues that could be largely affecting especially younger people if they don't move away. Like being 1 or 2 paychecks away from homelessness is something that my generation in Sunnyvale has unfortunately had to deal with more often than not. So bringing that perspective and saying, hey, that hasn't been a core competency of our city, but maybe it should be. And I think it should be. And I think the voters want it to be as well.
Mayor, where can we see that Gen Z perspective in your work?
2 big things. So the first one actually was my very first meeting as a council member. I introduced an item, an equal pay ordinance, right? So my dad passed away when I was a little bit younger, and now having a single mom and 2 sisters, being the middle child, that's always been fun. I saw a lot of those struggles, right? And being that, again, Hercules is majority minority, I would always think about income and how that impacted people. So when I brought the idea of, hey, let's have an equal pay ordinance that requires folks who want to do business in town to not only agree to the California Equal Pay Act, but agree to our ordinance. And if they don't agree, or we found out they violated it, they can never do business in town again. Some of my colleagues were flipping out. They were like, well, it's not the role of the city to make sure that we enforce wages and stuff like that. And we actually see that businesses are creating a safe and healthy work environment. So that was definitely the Gen Z perspective, just given how much wage disparity we have. But then the second one was around similar to what Assemblymember Lee mentioned, climate change. Brought up an ordinance, both these ordinances I passed, equal pay ordinance too, was banning gas in new development. And if you're remodeling your home or whatever, 50% or more, has to be 100% electric. Oh my goodness, the fight that happened. It was a 3-2 vote at the end of the day, but it was like some people were having amnesia. It's like I have facts from all these different hospitals. Professors from UC Berkeley are calling in talking about the risk and harm that gas brings. But it was, no, we want to make sure that we make it friendly for developers. I'm like, man, those people are going to make their money and skedaddle back to Orange County, and we'll never hear from them again. But these people are going to be here investing in our community for decades to come. So again, it's always just that, like, I guess it's similar to what my friends have mentioned. It's thinking down the road and not just in that moment. That's typically the issue that I see with some of my older colleagues. They think about in that first 5-second bubble, but not thinking 20 years down the road, that kid who doesn't have asthma and doesn't know why, but it's because of that ordinance that we passed 20 years ago.
All right, well, we are going to have to leave the conversation there. Thank you 3 so much for coming out, spending time with us, and giving us some insight into your work.
Thank you.
And before we go, I just want to give a thanks to the whole KQED Live team for putting this production together. If you want to find out more about the live events we have here, go to kqed.org/live.
Please check out the Leo T. McCarthy Center's civic engagement on the campus of the University of San Francisco.
And one more big round of applause for all of our elected officials.
Good job, y'all.
All right, thanks everyone.